Hello, everyone. I'm Meredith Lavitt. I'm the director of the Film Forward Initiative for the Sundance Institute. I want to welcome everyone here today for the 2014 Film Forward Google Hangout. We're really excited to be here with two Film Forward filmmakers from this past year, Laura Nix and Julia Meltzer, the directors of The Light in Her Eyes. And we're also thrilled to have all of you here to participate in this Film Forward Google Hangout. Joining us today, we have participants from Mexicali Rose in Mexico, Charlotte Teeters and her group from Imperial Valley, California, Keith Eaton and his students from Mount Desert Island in Maine, and Ivana Matic, all the way from Stolac in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So welcome everyone to the Hangout. Few quick words about Film Forward. Film Forward is an international touring program. The goal of Film Forward is to create greater cultural understanding through the exhibition of film and conversations with filmmakers and audiences. We're an initiative of both the Sundance Institute and the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. Film Forward's in partnership with the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So today, we're here to talk with Julia Meltzer and Laura Nix. They had the opportunity to travel with Film Forward. They went to, Laura went to Amman, Jordan in the Middle East, and she went to Maine, visiting Bangor and Monson and Mount Desert Island. And Laura traveled with us to Tacoma and Seattle, Washington. They traveled with their film, The Light in Her Eyes, which all of you have seen. And the film really does open up a debate about the role of women within Islam, but also just, you know, what is our role as mothers and daughters and sisters, teachers and workers. Syria is in the news today. The film really was used to hopefully change perceptions about what people are like in Syria, and we'll hear a little bit more from Julia and Laura. So I'd like to take a moment to turn it over to them to introduce themselves and their film. Julia, why don't you start?
Unmute. I'm right. I'm on now, right? My name is Julia Meltzer, and with Laura, we both co-produced and co-directed the film. And I had the great opportunity to go to Seattle and Tacoma. And would you like me to say something briefly about the film, Meredith?
Yeah, just a couple of things.
So one thing that's important to note is that this film was shot before the uprising in Syria began. So the film is really a portrait of a specific place, a mosque for women, that's located near the center of Damascus. And it shows what life is like within this particular community and in Damascus before the uprising happened. Laura and I both felt really lucky to be able to have access to this place and to capture a moment there that doesn't exist anymore.
Great. Laura, I'd love to have you introduce yourself.
Thanks for having us here today. It's exciting to get to meet all of you all over the world at one time. And the film, I think one thing that we like to say when we start talking about it is that we weren't trying to make a film about Syria, capital S, per se, nor were we trying to make a film about all Muslim women. We wanted to make a film about one school and the teacher and her family and the community of women that she lives in as a way to have a conversation about a lot of other topics through looking through a smaller lens. So that's what we're really hoping that we can talk about today is those larger topics and also answer any questions that you might have about Huda and the community that she lives in. Did you want us to say anything else about our trips to Film Forward, Meredith, or is that in a second?
I think as you're answering questions, you can fill that in. Let's meet the rest of the participants of the Hangout, and why don't we start with Charla. Why don't you introduce your group and have them introduce, and then we'll just go down the line.
All right. Hello, my name is Charlotte Teeters, and I'm the film commissioner for Imperial County and have had the wonderful opportunity to work with Meredith and Bethany on 2 Film Forward sessions, so that was a wonderful experience. And I'm going to let my group here introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Nicole Sanchez, and I'm in the film club with Charlotte Teeters and Awesome.
My name is Rudy Robles. I'm also with the film club here in Imperial County.
And they're both students here in Imperial County as well.
Great. Marco, you're up. Marco, can you hear us? Maybe not. Why don't we go to Ivana? Well, I think we lost Ivana. Okay, let's head over to Mount Desert Island. Keith, do you want to introduce your group? No? Can any or have we lost signal, Bethany?
Can you hear us actually?
Great. Great.
Okay. Clifton's going to introduce us. Wave to the camera, Clifton.
Hey, we're Mr. Eaton's Honors American Lit class. I'm Clifton, and I don't really. We need to introduce everybody individually.
So we're a bunch of juniors in an honors English class on Mount Desert Island off the coast of Maine.
Great.
And
Well, great. Well,
I'm standing off camera because hi.
all right. Let's go over to Kelly Rose. And have them introduce me. Marco, can you hear us? Okay, well, Marco's here, and Anna will be joining us again. Why don't we with Charlotte asking a question?
Can we have a mute his group because it keeps flashing back and forth. We're having trouble hearing. Group is not muted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Sorry, we're being joined by somebody here. The first question we had, and a couple different questions that had come up, were specifically about the difficulty of actually obtaining permission to film in Syria and being able to, go to this school and how difficult that was. How did you obtain access to that?
I'm going to do that question. I'll answer that question. So I initially met Huda in 2005 when I was a Fulbright Fellow in Damascus teaching journalism at the University of Damascus. And a friend of mine introduced me to her. And at the time that I met her, I was very interested in her school because I noticed that people always showed up on time, that it was a really vibrant, very active community, and that's one thing that's very hard to do in Syria, is people are not actually allowed to gather in groups, but that was something that was starting to happen in mosques. So at the time that I met Huda, I asked her if it would be possible to make a film about her school. That was in 2005. She asked me to get permission from the Ministry of Information, which I did try to do, and they actually never answered any of my requests, which in Syria is a way of saying no. So then that was like 2007. In 2008, every time I went back to Syria, I went to visit Huda and reminded her that I would like to make this film. And in 2008, she said, you know what, let's forget about the permissions. Let's just go ahead and make the film. So shooting started in 2008, which was 3 years after the original idea.
Right.
And it was a big risk, actually, for Huda to take on having American filmmakers in her mosque, because activities in mosques in Syria, even then, were watched all the time. And the way things work there is that within a group of people, within any mosque or any school, there are always people who are reporting to the mukhabarat, or the secret police. So it was a risk for her. And I will say also that Huda was from a family who had in Arabic you say they have wasta, so they have protections. They have credibility, and in a way they have currency with the regime. So I think she felt that it wasn't something that was going to go on for that long, and it was a risk that she was willing to take because she wanted people to know what was happening at her mosque. And also she was someone who had dealt with foreigners before. Most people in Huda's position, like if you were a woman and you were running a girls' school in a mosque, would not have let any foreigners in because it's just not something that people do there. They don't trust people from the outside. They're really worried about what might happen with them in relation to the police or the regime. So it was not, it's not an easy community to gain access to, or it's not an easy story to tell because people are so deeply suspicious. And I think that's why we don't hear often from women, within conservative, traditional communities in the Middle East because people are deeply distrustful. And it's also extremely private. In a lot of those places, women might think that they need to ask their husbands for permission, or their brothers or their uncles. And in this situation, Huda has a husband who very much supports what she does, so she didn't have to ask her husband for permission to do this.
Just a quick follow-up to that. We hear a lot about the Muslim community not necessarily wanting to educate their women in their groups. Was that anything that had to be dealt with? I mean, obviously the school exists and they're learning and the Quran, but was there any what's the word I'm looking for? Any pushback against the fact that they were being educated?
No, but then again, in Syria, secular education is mandatory. So
I didn't know
that. When we I guess I just would emphasize that these communities are incredibly diverse, and generally the news that trickles back to us, makes everything very black and white and simple. So you might say like, oh, within Muslim communities, women are not allowed to be educated. But
that's the highlight that you hear. So
and I think that that's absolutely inaccurate, and definitely, within communities in Afghanistan, within particular communities in Afghanistan, or within particular communities in maybe Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan, that might be the case. But I also want to say that within Saudi or Pakistan, there's plenty of educated women. So it's just the way of the news media sort of funneling and simplifying things, and that's what we end up hearing.
Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thanks, Julia. So it looks like Marco's group was able to join from Mexicali Rose again. So Marco, do you want to introduce everyone? And then go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, so we are the Mexicali Rose group, and these are two of students that have made experimental video, actually, and in the documentary course, but they went with experimental video. This is Agni Maldonado.
Hi.
And this is Cecil Martinez. Hi. And they have some questions for you guys.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask is that before the Quran schools for girls or women, how do you women practice religion? How did the woman practice religion back before the Quran school?
Well, women and girls in Huda's community have been practicing, but it's the way that they practice. And before people like Huda started creating the schools that she began, women might be taught in the home. So there might be a woman who would come to the house who would teach them Quran and a little bit of Quran memorization, a little bit about Hadith, but they didn't necessarily have the kind of formal instruction that they get when they are able to go to the mosque. And that's what's really important about what Huda is doing, is that she's creating an environment for people to go that's more disciplined, that's more structured, that has a better education, a better religious education for the girls. So the girls are learning. They're learning a lot about the Quran. They're also learning a more intensive version of memorizing the Quran. But they're also getting access to a community of people. Instead of being separated in the homes, they're able to go to the mosque to be able to hang out with each other. And in that community, that's important to be able to go do that, because it's not as accepted for people to go just hang out anywhere. But the mosque is a place where it's okay for women to go. So they like to go because they get to get out of the house and they get to go see their friends.
Okay. My first question for you is, what motivates you to make this film? Yeah, that's my question.
Yep, got it. So this is Julia. Well, I initially, very initially, the kind of like primary spark to make this film was that I walked into this place and I saw that there was a lot of little girls reading, and they were being encouraged to read, and they were actually encouraging each other to read and memorize. And you know, certainly it's a controversial text, the Quran, and learning to read and memorize classical Arabic, which is what the Quran is written in, and is a very complicated thing. It's not easy for anybody. You know, it's not easy for a 20-year-old. It's not easy for a 40-year-old. So I was struck by that, and I also thought, you know, we don't get to see places like this very often. So if it were possible to show basically just what happens in a mosque and what people do, that is a, you know, is a picture that's kind of very counter to what we imagine of these places to be, which is generally boys with beards and little caps memorizing, right? I think that's kind of like the image that's been plastered around the world that we all conjure up. And so I thought it would be interesting to show a place that was not that, which is a very, in a way, typical scene that happens in many places in the Middle East, and it's not what we think it is. So that was kind of like the knee-jerk very initial impulse to make the film. And I don't know, maybe Laura, you want to say something about, you know, of course, when you make a film, your initial ideas change a lot because you have to tell a story. Well, Laura, you can take it from there.
Yeah, I would just add to that when Julia and I were seeing these images from the mosque, it became very clear that we don't have access to those images. This is this is a moderate form of Islam that's being practiced, and in Western media, you see extremist versions of Islam here. That's what you see portrayed, and you don't see the images of people who are practicing in this manner, even though what they're doing in Huda's mosque is very typical and very, I mean, it's hard to make generalizations about a region or about a religion as big as Islam is that's all over the world, because it differs a lot from country to country, and even within Syria and in other parts of the region. But basically, we don't have very many images of moderate Islam in the West, and this was an opportunity to show a window into one part of that world that we thought would help expand people's ideas about what they think about this place and challenge their perceptions.
So, how do you think that the Western people have to, well, how do they have to see the things, or what do they have to do with research to really understand the context of the video of the movie, you know? Because for me it was difficult to understand a lot of things because I'm really out of the context, and maybe I know some things because I did some research and something, but it's kind of difficult to really get what they're happening there because we just get what the media, we can keep watching the news and something like that. But do you think that it's missing there, or what will be the key to us for understand better the context?
Well, I think I think that especially right now, the news that we get from Syria, within the last 2 years is a really, really different picture than what our film shows. And I imagine that many people who watch this film now think, well, that looks so normal and nice. Why is all this stuff happening now? And actually one thing that Laura and I a problem we ran into when we were doing a lot of our focus group, screening our rough cut for various people, is that people's idea about Syria, even before any of the uprising was happening, is that it's a really dangerous place. It's a more conservative or perhaps more extremist version of Islam is practiced there, which is not the case at all. So it was really a struggle for us as filmmakers to figure out how much information do we put at the beginning of the film? What context do we need to offer people without giving them a history lesson on the region? Because we couldn't do that. We had to have our story move along. And we needed to give people the information, just enough information that they needed to understand what was happening, to understand the context, and then to be able to enter into Huda's life. So, I don't know, I guess I would be curious to ask you, what type of things did you feel like you didn't understand, or what more information did you need in order to understand? What were you missing? What other questions did you have about what was going on?
Well, I'm missing about the social dynamics that is involving the Islamic culture with families and how people interact, because here in the West we interact different. We have some similar things in the dynamic society, but we do the things different, because we don't have religion to live our life or something like that, or maybe we do, but not in the same way. Maybe here in Mexico, when you're a girl, you have to do all the house chores and stuff, but there's not the same way that you have the obligation to get married at certain age or something like that. I don't think anything is missing, but I think it's maybe some, I don't know, extra material or maybe some information that where you're looking for, it will be really helpful. It's not that it's wrong, it's I feel like sometimes I'm missing something in the history because I don't know what is happening really.
Julie and I used to say a lot that we hope that you leave with more questions than you began, and we both like a kind of filmmaking that offers the opportunity to do that. There is other types of filmmaking that does give you a lot of information and present to you a lot of material to give you perhaps an idea that at the end of seeing that film that you know what you need to know. And we felt okay with creating a film that left a lot of open-ended questions because we want people to still feel curious about this place and leave you thinking and believing, wow, maybe this is a part of the world that I really don't know as much about that I thought that I did. I know that for myself, the more time I spend in that region, the less I think I know. And I think that that's always a good measure, is that you're being engaged in a way that you really want to know more and that you have a lot more questions to pursue, and we hope that the film will encourage viewers to go do that.
Thanks, Laura. So it sounds like really sort of the goals of Film Forward are at work here, because part of the program is to introduce new cultures and new ideas and societies, communities, and it's not to answer all the questions, but show that there are similarities and there also are a lot of differences that we can begin to learn about and appreciate that not everybody's the same. And what I'd like to do now, I see that Imperial Valley has their hands up, but I'd like to give Ivana and Mount Desert Island an opportunity to connect with us and introduce themselves and ask their initial question. So Ivana, we're going to go to you, and then after Ivana, we'll go to Mount Desert.
Hi, can you hear me? I can't really hear.
Ivana, you might be on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can barely hear you.
Okay, wait.
You,
Can you
that
hear me
sounds
now?
better.
Okay. So I had a question that I wanted to really ask. I wonder why you chose Hootie, or I can't remember her name exactly. But why her? How did you even get to see her? Where did you find out about her?
So the question was why Huda?
Yeah.
Why did we choose her? And really, the reason why we chose her was because I knew someone who knew her. I mean, not to really sound like simplistic or ridiculous, that why didn't you go and interview 20 people who run mosques and then figure out who the best one was? Well, things don't work like that there. Generally, if you have access to a place, you have a friend who knows a friend, or actually I have a historian friend who said to me, well, the reason why I did my dissertation in Egypt on this archive was because I met a guy in a parking lot who had access to that archive. I mean, so it really is like that. It's like I met Huda, I knew her, I knew there was this movement happening, and I asked her because she knew me, there was a chance she was going to say yes.
And because she did say yes, because no one else said yes.
Yeah. So it's really as simple as that. It's like this is a location that we could step into this world and show this kind of, very micro lens in a way on a place that hopefully opens up a larger world just because you're looking at this one place so closely. But as Laura said at the beginning, we're not making a film about all women mosques in Syria. We're not making a film about Syria. It's about this particular place, and it is definitely representative of something that's happening there. And this place has particularities and it has nuances that other places don't have, but it also has a lot of similarities to other mosques and other girls' schools. So it's a way to learn something about that world through one place.
So was it hard to find people who are going to open up to you and talk about this particular situation?
Well, actually, once you have your foot in the door there, women in the mosque were very welcoming and were very happy to have us there, and we got to go to people's houses who were connected to that mosque. But, it was difficult every time. I mean, we had access to certain people, but the way that things work in Syria, because we're Americans there with cameras, we didn't have all the necessary permissions to shoot in the street. We didn't have permissions to go shoot in malls. I mean, there's a scene in a mall that we were able to kind of like hijack onto a friend's permit she was working for the BBC. So that's why that scene is in there. It's a very hard place to work, and we, as filmmakers, when you're presented with certain restrictions and constrictions, you just figure out how to overcome them.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the scene in the mall, and I thought it was very strange because they were Huda and her daughter, and they were all covered up, and then behind them you see a girl who is like half naked and wearing a top, and I don't know. So I was wondering if there's like, did you see a big like contrast between religious people and people who are not very religious in Syria?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a big contrast in Syria, but maybe less so than you would find, less so than you might find, even in Egypt or in the Gulf. Generally, Syria has been a pretty secular, cosmopolitan society, but like in Lebanon or like in Jordan, you'll find people who are more conservative and traditional walking down the street next to a woman wearing a tank top, and every people coexist. And I think probably in some ways it's still like that there, even though the circumstances are very different. But the society, the fabric of the society, is one that people are used to difference.
And I just wanted to say how I find it very interesting, like when Huda was speaking to the girls, and she was saying how they are free, actually, but they don't seem very free to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. She just so Ivana just said that when Huda was saying that you're free, like I think you're referencing the scene where she says you're free to choose, you're free to be the president, you're free to blah blah blah, and then Ivana said they don't seem very free to me. And I think that yes, in some ways maybe if you compare the choices that those girls are able to make in their lives, it certainly is more restrictive than maybe certainly the lives that we live here in the United States. I'm maybe just making assumptions about what life is like there for you, but I guess part of what we wanted to show in this film, telling this story, is that women and girls do have choices. They're different choices. It's a different set of cultural traditions there, but they are making choices. They're making choices to go to the mosque. They're making choices sometimes to say, I'm going to study pharmacy versus studying, journalism. It's not the picture that maybe we often get shown, which is like women are locked in a house, or their brother or their uncles are beating them, or they're less like, just go get married to that person. I mean, certainly that exists, but it didn't exist as far as we saw in this mosque. And, it's a tricky thing, I think, to tell a story that is about a limited range of choices, or a community that's conservative where their options are different than ours. But within that, what Huda's doing is slightly broadening those opportunities.
I think one thing that's really interesting about your question, Ivana, and thank you for that, like, really, are these girls free? I think we all have a different construct of what that word means. And another label, the idea of feminism, Western and Eastern feminism may be different. Feminism within what Huda's doing may be different than the way some of you view feminism. And so that was a really interesting conversation with this film that we had in Washington is, how do we understand labels and how do they apply in different circumstances, communities. So with that, I'd really love to turn this over to Mount Desert Island. Have you guys ask your first question.
Can you hear us?
We can.
Oh, great. Okay.
Hi, I'm Mia. We were wondering how you made the transition from being interested in film to actually being involved in the film industry and being directors of a film.
Keith, could you repeat the question for us?
Sure. Yeah. So how did you guys transition from being young people who are interested in film and who are interested in filmmaking to being, filmmakers and directors, people who are involved in the film industry?
I think that by working. So I started out college. Sorry, there's an echo. That too? You do.
I'll turn our mic off for now.
Oh yeah, if you turn the mic. Okay. I didn't study film in college. I was a history major, and I actually am a believer in getting a liberal arts education as a good way of studying film, as a good training and preparation for studying film. I don't think you have to go to film school to do this, because I think that there's the opportunity to learn other things about filmmaking later on. But starting out with an education where you're learning how to think and think critically and ask hard questions and to be able to review many sources and evaluate them can be a good thing to do, and I think that a liberal arts degree can help that. I started out as an assistant editor on documentaries, and it was some of my first jobs that I got out of college after I did a little bit of waitressing and temping. And I was doing this on 16mm film back when we were editing on film, and I did that for a number of years, and it was really helpful to be around more senior people who were making films and learning from them, learning how they put a film together, learning how an edit room was run, learning how the kinds of conversations that people have in an edit room and how they put a film together, because it's a very special collaborative environment where people are spending a very long time together. A lot of documentaries are edited for over a year, and to sit in a small room with a few people making something creatively is a great experience, but it has its own flow and rhythm to it, and pacing to it, and there's a bit of a hierarchy in the room that it's good to understand how that works. And that was how I began. Some people start out by shooting. Some people start out by, I mean, I was also making experimental films as a filmmaker from the beginning. That was how I first began, was doing experimental work. But when I was doing that, I was also working in documentary. These were films that were for public television, like American Experience or Frontline. And I went on to work for other filmmakers, and I kept doing that while I was also making my own films until eventually I could make the two cross, and I could make longer form work that I was creatively in charge of. But I'm a believer in working with teams of other people as a way of learning, and I think that that's a good thing for young filmmakers to do.
Julia,
Okay, so
go ahead, Keith. Go ahead, Keith.
Sure. Will, I think Will has a question.
Hi, Will. Hi, Will.
Hi, how's it going? So one of our questions was, I know that the film was, you guys had a really tough time getting permission, and you eventually didn't really get the official permission that you were looking for. So then how did you find the money to fund this film? Where did the funding come from? And did it require a lot of funding, or?
Did you guys hear that?
Yep, got it.
Good.
I think you need to shut your mic. Oh, great. Okay. So the initial funding for this project came from, I think it was 2 or 3 grants from foundations, actually, that were awarded to me for past work that I've done. So it wasn't a lot of money. It definitely wasn't enough to make, it was enough to do the first shoot and to do some editing for a little bit. So it really was kind of piecemeal, the way that we made this film, which, I don't know whether I can say don't do that or do that, because a lot of films get made that way, and if we didn't do that, certainly this film wouldn't be made. But there's many filmmakers who would say, well, you raise a much bigger chunk of money at the beginning so you can get through a certain point. But I felt that the window of opportunity to shoot and to be there was going to be a small one, and it was important to go and do it and then see what happens. So we shot the first part, and then there was an additional grant that came in from the Guggenheim Foundation, and then there was a very long dry period where we applied to probably every grant that would be available to us, and we didn't get anything. I mean, actually, there was one year, I think, where we didn't get anything, and then by chance, some foundation was like, mailed us $5,000 for no reason. I mean, it was like, $5,000 goes away like that when you're making a film. And we were like, weird that this person sent us $5,000 after we'd been applying for so many grants and getting rejected again and again and again and again. And, I guess, one thing that you guys should all know is that that is part of filmmaking. That is really part of filmmaking, is expect the dry periods, and you need to have the fortitude to make it through those periods, because that's what happens, especially when you're making your first couple films, and even after you make a couple films, it still happens. And so you need to kind of always think like, okay, well, what is the material that I have right now, and how do I make a story out of this if I'm not going to be able to go back and shoot anymore? Or, you are constantly sort of revising and reframing what the story is. And you do that when you write proposals as well. You're asked to describe things that you do not know will happen in the story. You're honestly making things up that you are putting on paper, saying like, this is someone's life story, and I'm kind of creating it here on paper, and maybe it's a total lie. And that's part of the process, and then you see how much your story kind of comes in line with that proposal, and you really try to, hopefully you're writing something that you believe in and that you want to see come to fruition. So this film was a process like that, and one thing that Laura and I really hoped for from the beginning was to get the film broadcast on POV. That really was that was a goal that we had. We wanted to make a film for the American public that would be shown on public television. And we were really, really, really lucky to have that come true. And it wasn't just like it materialized out of nowhere. It was about establishing relationships with people at POV, letting them know that the film existed, keeping them updated on our progress, and also keeping a lot of people in that world updated on our progress. And then it honestly a lot of time comes down to luck.
Thanks, Laura. That was a lot of food for thought in the filmmaking funding process and storytelling process. At the heart of this, we are, filmmakers are storytellers, and I think you have to have a good story that's going to connect to people, which is, why people then mobilize around your film. I'd like to give Rudy from Imperial Valley had a question early on, and we have about 5 more minutes left. So, Rudy, why don't you ask your question? Hopefully, we can get one more in after that.
Okay, well, it's more to clarify Mexicali Rosa's question on how to get more information on understanding what actually is going on prior to watching the film and afterwards. I found some articles on the film's website that helped my understanding of what really goes on from opposed to what we actually see in the media. If you can go to I don't remember the actual URL for the Light in Your Eyes, Her Eyes film website, but there's a couple articles there if you look under resources.
Yeah, it's the lightinhereyesmovie.com. But if you go to resources or to media, we've done a really, really, hopefully very good job of keeping up to date any of the reviews, articles, references. And then there's also another section, resources, where you can go and learn background information. We have interviews with scholars and academics, and so there's a lot of information there. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, and I would recommend checking out POV's website, which is pbs.org/POV/The Light in Her Eyes. And they put together a beautiful website for us that has a lot of other references on it. And there's also a bunch of deleted scenes from the movie that you can find there. Whole characters that we were hoping to include, but we weren't able to, that give you a fuller idea of the community.
Great. Does anyone have another?
If you have a question from, you guys were so patient for so long at Charlotte's community. Did you guys have another question?
I see a question from Mexicali Rose.
They're stealing our thunder.
Yeah, I found how I have to move to another city for political problems. Does the institute continue with current education?
Did you understand the question?
Yeah, I got it. The question was, does the school still exist? Or are they still continuing with Quranic education? Well, Huda's not there anymore, so she's not there to educate the community of girls who came really to work with her. My understanding is that the mosque isn't closed, and one of the reasons why it's not closed is because the regime, at least as of maybe 6 months ago or 8 months ago, wants to present a very normal picture of life in Syria, that they try to keep things open, so it's like, oh, the war is not happening, because in a lot of ways it hasn't really come to the very center of Damascus, but that was 6 months ago. I mean, there's been plenty of car bombings right in the center of Damascus. So it's not continuing in any way like it was before, but people still do go to the mosque. But girls probably don't go to the mosque because their family and their fathers and their mothers are not letting them leave the house, basically because it's dangerous.
How do you think that Western society, like you're Americans and you're going there to do a documentary about life in Syria, and that kind of influence of the modern world there in that conservative society, like the Islamic society, and the current school, how do you think that changed social dynamics? Because there's girls going alone, leaving to other countries to study, like Hoda's daughter and the other girl that was studying, but she has to stop because she had to get married and something like that. But how do you think that you or other people from other countries that goes with maybe with other, I don't know, maybe charities or human rights or something like that, that goes to the places that have changed society there?
Well, one thing that I think was really interesting to be there and to spend time there was that they very much consider themselves to be modern people, and they consider the degree to which they follow their faith to be part of their modernity. So here we have this idea that being modern means that you have to lose religion. I think that that's kind of an idea that's very held in the West, that you move away from religion the more modern you get. But in that part of the world right now, there's really not the perception in the same way. It's like I am a modern person, and one of the ways, in fact, that I choose to be modern is by following my faith to the degree that I am. And there's a lot of reasons for that we could talk about a lot. It has to do with colonialism. It has to do with how certain kind of Western governments have been in power for a long time, and people in some ways who are opposing that choose religion as one way of making that stance. But they very much consider themselves to be modern and making modern choices. They also, I think some of the more interesting questions that I got when we were there was questions from women who would ask us, well, how do you feel about the way that women are treated in the West and the way that women are treated in your country, because they're treated really terribly? And I would be like, what do you mean we're treated really terribly? And they would say, well, because of how you're so sexualized, because of the way that women there are shown to be these sex objects in billboards and in all that advertising, and you're really oppressed. And I think that they're making a very valid point, and that that's a very interesting thing to bring up about the culture that we live in. So I think that this assumption somehow that this is a group of women that are really oppressed and they have all these problems, and that people from, filmmaking or human rights or whatever can give them something to help them move along in their progression, reflects our own values and how we think about that. But the way that they think about it is configured a bit differently, and they think that we really need a lot of help here. And that's exactly why it's good to go have a conversation with people who live in a very different culture from yourself, because the perceptions that we have on both sides are rather skewed, but also just point to the assumptions that we have and how different they are.
So I saw that Mount Desert Island had their hand up. Do you guys want to ask the last question?
I think they would like to ask the last question. My name's Ethan. I'll make this really quick. So something I really noticed during the recitation of like the Quran, the classical Arabic, was how musical it sounded. And is there a special sort of significance to some of the tones that they had to say during that? Did you pick up on that question?
Yeah, got the question.
Great.
So I'm gonna wait till you mute. Is that good? Mute? Good. So, another question? Another question in the back? No?
I think you're good.
Okay. So, yes, the tradition of reciting the Quran is one that goes back to the origins of the text before it was written. And it's an art to recite the Quran beautifully, and there's different ways to do it. There's different styles, and you could go online and find some of the most amazing Quranic reciters on YouTube, and you'll hear very different ways of singing it. But I'll just say that an experience that I had in the mosque with one of the women who appears at the beginning of the film, her name is Hind, she's a teacher. I was asking women to recite the Quran for the camera, to read maybe one of their favorite surahs and to tell me what it meant to them. And when she recited a surah to me, and I finally understood really deeply why people believe and take that text to be holy, because it was such an incredible experience. I mean, it's like anytime you hear someone sing who's an amazing singer, you're moved to tears sometimes, and you understand the meaning even if you don't understand the language. And a lot of the ways that people converted to Islam very, very early on was just by hearing people recite the text, and they said, I'm converted. I'll follow that religion because that's an amazing, beautiful text, and whatever it is, I believe. So, yeah, it's a history that goes back. And actually, the initial one of the initial things that we wanted to do with the film was to capture all the different ways that it's recited and how kind of language and faith and this holy text are all bound together. So I'm glad that it came across for you.
Thanks. So we're almost out of time. Before we close, I'd love for both Julia and Laura to just reflect a little bit on their Film Forward experience and sort of one takeaway each, or one memorable experience you'd like to share with the group.
It was really, I guess, two things, because I went to two really different places. I was in Amman, Jordan, and then I was in Maine. So that in and of itself was incredible, to be able to have the opportunity to screen the film for such different audiences. I would say that the thing that struck me the most when I was showing the film in Jordan was how passionately people received the film. When we show it in the States, people are very interested in it, and they tend to, they're like, wow, that's really interesting, and it made me think about things a little bit differently. But it's more kind of abstract or intellectual, and it was very different to show the film in a community of people who are much more similar. We were across the border from Syria. That's the closest that we're ever going to be able to get to Syria at the moment, to be able to show the film. So it was incredibly meaningful to show the film in the region. And people cried, they hugged me, they said many things that were just, they received the film in a very emotional, passionate manner, and that was very gratifying to see the effect that it had. That's what you hope for as a filmmaker, that you make something that people will engage with as passionately as they did. And so I was very curious after that, like, what is it going to be like to go show the film in Maine and to show the film in really small communities in Maine, that's so different from showing the film in the Middle East. And I was just very impressed by people's openness and by the intelligence of people's questions. I showed the film to numerous high schools, including yours at Mount Desert Island, and I was really impressed and moved by how thoughtful people were in responding to this culture and this material. And the conversation that we had at each place was very detailed and thorough and comprehensive, and some of the best Q&As I've ever been a part of for the film. So going to both places was so valuable.
So I was in Seattle and in Tacoma, and I think I had kind of a similar experience to Laura with showing in a very kind of diverse array of venues. We were in high schools and in a middle school, and then at this amazing little cinema in Tacoma called the Grand Cinema, which I loved. And in the Q&A there was a man who was a journalist, and he had talked to me before the screening, and he was asking me about journalism and how we reported in Syria. And you know, our film is not really journalistic. And he said, after he saw the film, he said, you know, I was watching the film and I was thinking, oh, why didn't she ask that question? Why didn't they, you know, hit harder there? And then he said, as the film went on, he realized that the film wasn't about taking that path. It was about showing all the details of life there and how people relate to each other, and kind of a much more intimate portrait of life that allows you to step into that world. And he said, thank you for giving me that opportunity to experience what that life is like and not just report information. And then there was this other woman who came up to me after that screening, and she said, you know, my perception of what girls' life is like in Syria is that the girls live a very limited life and they don't have fun, and you know, it would be pretty terrible to be a girl, wouldn't it? I mean, that's what I thought. And then after the film, she said, you know, actually, like, it's not terrible to be a girl there. I mean, they're having a good time and they're enjoying each other, and they have a lot of life in them. So those two things were really valuable to me, because that's what we wanted to do with the film. We wanted people to be able to step into people's lives and to see what it's like to be a girl or a woman within this conservative traditional community, and that it's not what you expect.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for participating today on behalf of the Sundance Institute and the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, the NEH and the NEA, and the IMLS. You know, this is just another important step in our program to really connect everyone as a global community, and hopefully you guys will continue this dialogue after the Google Hangout. You can go online and share more thoughts and connect with each other, but it's been really interesting. We've talked about freedom, and we've talked about women's roles and sort of process, and what's the process in making these important films, and how do you gain access and find subjects. And I think it's also just created a lot of curiosities for all of us. So thank you for joining us from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Mexico, from California and Maine and New York and California. So thanks again, you guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.